Hello everybody, this is the Empirical Audiophile, and today I'm going to be reviewing this Simply 845. Now, the new Simply 845 ranks at the top of Unison Research line of integrated tube amplifiers, second only to the historic Absolute 845, which is their top-of-the-line integrated amplifier. Now, that particular amplifier was Product of the Year in the Absolute Sound in 1994. The Unison Research has been around since 1987, making integrated amplifiers, and they seem to have went that route other than making separates. Today they do make separates, but they seem to really flourish and put all their attention to integrated amplifiers, such as the one you're looking at here. The tube complement is you have two 845 output tubes, and you have four 12 AU7 tubes for the preamplifier. Yes, the preamplifier of this integrated amp is a tube preamplifier, so it's solid tubes. The thing about the solid integrated amplifier is that you don't have to buy an interconnect cable from a separate preamp to the amp. So the integration is seamless and not quite something that you have to see if you're going to get the synergy right. The synergy is already there. I will in this review compare it to, at times, the Conrad Johnson Premier 10 and the Conrad Johnson Premier 11A, which is, once again, in the top of the line of the Conrad Johnson line. The integrated amplifier, the first thing you'll notice is it will have a remote control. The remote control is made out of wood and aluminum. The wood has been stained in ebony. I don't think it's ebony wood. I just think it's been stained black to look like it. And of course, the face is aluminum. You have to unscrew it to replace the batteries that are inside of it, but it looks very nice. The whole amplifier, in fact, if you look at it, is a very classic looking Italian amplifier. Like, you know, their cars, the Maserati, Lamborghinis, Ferraris. Basically, Italians not only want their stuff to play nice and sound nice, but they want it to look nice, classic. Not the industrial look like so many of us constantly see, where, like my Conrad Johnson, it has a more industrial look to it. A lot of amplifiers and preamplifiers, or even integrated amplifiers for that fact, have an industrial look. Some people like that look. But the Italians have taken a different idea or a different kind of path of making their amplifiers look classic, like a piece of art. Something that you can show off almost like a piece of art. And that's what it is with the wood front and sides. It kind of reminds me of the wood on this integrated amplifier, reminds me of receivers and amplifiers of long ago when you would buy a Fisher receiver, or you would buy a Scott's, or in fact, even my Pioneer SX1250 had wood on the sides, on top. It was something that went out of favor as time went on, and they started making cheaper and cheaper like receivers, and then the wood went by the wayside. Almost like you see when you see Macintosh equipment, you can find where Macintosh equipment used to sell wood cases that you could put the Mac equipment in. Look very nice. For me, I like it. Maybe I'm just old school, but I think it looks very nice. In this review, I'm going to be talking about the sonic characteristics, and I'll be talking about characteristics of how it compares to the Conrad Johnson. On the back of the Simply 845, you have your CD, you have your tuner, AV, I think that's for your audio video, auxiliary, and then you have a tape out, which I don't understand why they even do that. And they have a sub out, which I kind of like. I will get in the review to let you know about the sub out, but that's your RCAs going directly to your subwoofer if you have one. Then you have your binding post for your left and right. They are decent binding posts. No, they're not going to be like that of a Jeff Rowland, but they are decent, and you see these binding posts on several amps and integrated amps of what they're using. So they're not bad binding posts at all. As we can see by the back here, I have it all hooked up. It looks very nice. Now, the power cord I did replace. They give you a power cord with it, of course, and I replaced it with an aftermarket power cord. This is only like a $35 power cord from Amazon. It is a 10 gauge. It also has a ferrite clamp on it for any RF that may get into it. Did I notice any kind of big sonic difference? No, I did not. But I just felt that this integrated amp, since it runs on a continuous 320 watts of power continuously, because it is a Class A, I felt that the 10 amp power cord would be better than just using the one that they gave. Sonically, I noticed nothing, but everything hooked up quite fine. As you can see by the hookups, this one shows that it's hooked up to a subwoofer and, of course, the speakers. I'll let you know right off the bat, everything is being gone through with RCA, is all Kimber silver, and of course the speaker wire is all Kimber silver also. The only thing is, you may see that blue and red RCA cable. That's going from the turntable, and that is Kimber PBJ. The integrated amp also comes with a tube cage in case you have children or animals, but for my review, I am not going to use the cage. I don't have any kids or animals to worry about, and I like aesthetically it to be off than on. Here's a picture of the inside. It uses a large quantity of JPX capacitors. They're extremely expensive, with JB electrolytic capacitors everywhere throughout the amp. Quality capacitors. Nothing that I could see was kind of skimped on. And here we're looking at the cover taken off. You will see a triodal power transformer there in black with the two power output transformers. Now, their transformers are all hand wound output transformers, and they are covered in some sticky substance. I don't know what it is, but it's you know, each manufacturer has their own niche. You know, Macintosh, they have theirs dipped in, or they have them in a can and they put tar in them. The Audio Note has their transformers dipped in paraffin, and apparently they put theirs in something sticky. I don't know what it is. It's not paraffin because it is a little tacky, but it protects the transformer from rust. One thing you don't want is you don't want your lambs to start rusting or anything. And of course, putting the Toyota power laminations in a can and then filling it up with a resin. So that's good that they did that. Another thing I wanted to bring up is look at the detail they have. They have the heat shield, and they're using brass posts to hold up the heat shield. I didn't feel that like the heat shield was absolutely needed, but they put one on just because of the heat being generated from the tubes. Now, I'll tell you right now, they're not so hot that you can't put your hand over the tube. You can put your hand over the tube and it's not going to burn you. They're not that hot. But I did check them out, and they ran about 250 to 300 degrees on the sides. But no, I don't feel that the amplifier, I was cautioned about the amplifier because it's a Class A, could warm up the room, and I'm not noticing that, but it's in a big room. The stereo is 25 by 25 by 12-foot high ceilings. So it's in a very big room, and it doesn't heat up the room, the slightest. So it's nothing to worry about there being Class A. And if you're not maybe familiar with Class A, basically it's full power all the time. So if it's 23 watts, it's giving you 23 watts all the time, full power. It doesn't have to ramp up or anything else. Plus the two 845 tubes, they are doing the sine wave. They are doing the sine wave completely. In other words, a push-pull amp, one tube is doing the plus and another tube is doing the minus. And you have to unify the two tubes, which is a little tricky to do, where Class A like this is not. It's a triode amp, so therefore it's doing the plus and minus. The tube is, so it's a lot smoother. It should be quite easy. A lot of people will say Class A amps are your best sounding of all the amps that are out there, and preamps or integrated amps. Class A is going to be your top. Most people don't go with it because of the power consumed by them constantly and the heat that they give off. But I don't feel anything to worry about the heat. And for the power, go out and buy yourself an antique receiver that they're selling today, circa 1975. Look at the back of them, see how much power they used idling. My Pioneer idled at 600 watts. Idled. Not doing a thing. You're already using 600 watts of power, and it peaked in at 1250 watts. There is caution, I will say, is these tubes are running at 1200 volts, higher than other amp tubes. So it's something to consider of don't be fooling around with them. Another thing I wanted to bring up is that your control knobs are very heavy, well-made control knobs. The front knob at the very front has, it's remote. So your volume control is all that handles. The on-off switch is right next to it. You can see it on your right-hand side. On your left-hand side on top is the switch that switches from your CD to tuner and everything else. And of course, I think I ought to bring this up. The tubes, of course, have dampening rings on them. That does not come with the amp. That's something that I bought, once again, off of Amazon, preparing for the amp to come in, and it's something that I just put on myself. So that's about it with the amp. Now let's get into what are its sonic characteristics, and we will compare it to, like I said, the top of the line Conrad Johnson. Okay, the first thing I do when I go to review a product, it doesn't matter whether it's an amp, preamp, integrated amp, it doesn't matter whether it's cables, interconnects, power cords, it doesn't matter. The first thing I do is run it through this Chesky CD here. It's a test CD. And this CD is going to reveal and give you a lot of information before you start pumping music through any new product that you have. I noticed that a lot of these reviewers, maybe they do it, but they don't tell you that they're doing it. But like with the Chesky CD, things I look for when I do play the Chesky CD, they will give you a track on it that has depth of image. And this depth of image, they have a drum for one thing, and they also have what they have as a clicker that they will click to let you know how many feet. Now, when I turned around and had my Conrad Johnson and I read the review, the reviewer said that some of the soundstage went as deep as like 30 feet. If I remember, I could be wrong on it, but I think it was in the review that the Conrad Johnson threw a depth of about 30 feet into the soundstage. I did not get that, unfortunately, because I have horns. I tried this integrated amp on two sets of horns, one the L-Tex and one the Klipsch heresies. I tried them on. I don't have any other speakers than those two speakers to test this integrated amp on. Okay, so one thing I noticed with horns, at least with my L-Techs, the sound staging to get that depth, that's why I bought the Conrad Johnson, because he said the sound staging went like 20 or 30 feet deep into the wall. And I thought, that's what I need. If you're a person with horns and you notice your sound staging doesn't sound that deep, it's because of your, amp and preamp that you're using or whatever. It just is the characteristic of horns also. At least I thought that. Okay, so on this test CD, it's going to take you from 3 feet all the way to 70 to 80 feet deep into the soundstage. So you can find out exactly how far the amplifier is going to go into the soundstage. So when I tested out the Conrad Johnson, I'm going to say 10, 15 feet, it sounded like it was that deep. And I was very happy with that. I thought, that's great for my horns. I'll accept that. Now, the Simply 845, a whole different animal when it came to sound staging. In fact, I was really quite shocked that the sound staging went all the way to 70 feet before it hit the wall. And what I mean by hit the wall, it just didn't seem to get any deeper. You couldn't tell from 70 feet into the wall that it was going 80 feet into the wall, where the Conrad Johnson stopped a lot sooner into the wall. And then after that, it just sounds like it's getting, what can I say? It's getting softer. That's all. It doesn't sound like it's really going deeper. It's just getting softer. The soundstage is. But with the Simply 845, it actually sounded like it was getting deeper and deeper into the soundstage all the way to 70 feet. So that was quite surprising. Now that's the reason I use this test CD, because it's going to tell you versus a CD you have no clue how deep a soundstage is, how wide it is, how high it is. You have no clue until you use a test CD that will tell you what they are doing and what the sound staging should be and how your speaker should be reproducing it. And this one did it in spades. It went all the way back where if you actually closed your eyes, you could imagine the drum kit being 70 feet inside the venue. I think the venue was a church, if I'm not mistaken. Anyhow, it passed that with flying colors. I was quite surprised. Then you have a dynamic drum test. Now, the dynamic drum test is probably the best drum kit you're going to hear, because Chesky has purposely mic'd this to be, I think, the most perfect drum kit you're going to hear, even though it's only 1 minute and 23 seconds long. But you'll hear the bass, you'll hear the bass drum, you'll hear cymbals just crashing. They did an excellent job of doing the drum kit so it sounds realistic. Now, this is something that I've heard before, and the Conrad Johnson did a good job on it, but nowhere near the Simply 845 can reproduce it. The low frequencies are all there, equal to the Conrad Johnson, but the high frequencies and the cymbals, they just shimmered and crashed. Unbelievable. Nothing like the Conrad Johnson could do. The Conrad Johnson, even though it had 6550 tubes in it and KT120 tubes, the high frequencies could not even come close to what the 845 tubes do. Not even come close. It was just, if you play it loud, which I did, and we're talking playing it at in the 90 dB range, the drum kit, it sounds real. And the cymbals just, I never thought my horn speakers could reproduce cymbals that good. But and now I realize that it depends on your amplification and your preamplification, because you got to remember, I'm using all the same cables. Nothing has changed. I'm using the same D to A converter, the Premier 9, or I'm using the Macintosh D to A converter with the transport. So nothing has changed in the front end. It's just the very back end of this integrated amp that has changed. And it was unbelievable. The cymbals, the crash of the cymbals and the drum kit. And I'm sitting 12 feet away. So we're talking, you're already in the 90 dB decibel range, and it never seemed to lack power, even though it's 23 watts. And of course, the speakers are 98 dB efficient, and the clips, I think, are, if I'm not mistaken, they're either 96 or 98 dB efficient for the Klipsch heresies. And they really shined using this integrated amp. I'm telling you right now. In fact, I'm going to tell you, stay to the very end. I have my comments on you Klipsch owners for your horn speakers. Anyhow, they had the bass resonance test. Now, that would be a bass fiddle, and I'm very familiar with that because my wife and I just went out to eat, and we were in Naples, Florida, and there was a live three-piece there, a singer, bass fiddle, and the piano there. And I paid special attention to the piano and the bass, and this produced the bass absolutely real, just like the drum kit. If it's loud enough, if it has the timbre, the resonating frequency of a real bass, it sounded just as real as when we were sitting in the restaurant. And that's one thing I liked about the 845. Not only was the soundstage unbelievable wide, I'm going to say the height of the soundstage is 4 to 5 feet high. That's about it. It wouldn't go any higher than from the ground on up. That's the best thing. But it could make according to the test CD, the speakers were able to extend beyond the speakers of the soundstage, which is kind of hard for horns to do, to really have them have a soundstage beyond the speakers. But in the test CD, it will, imaging and resolution test, it will definitely let you see how wide your soundstage is. Most of the time, 99% of the time, the soundstage is going to be in between the speakers. And the test CD showed that if you have the right, music that you're listening to, and if it was recorded correctly, you actually can extend that soundstage a little bit beyond the speakers. And for horn speakers, I thought, wow, that's really impressive to have a soundstage that wide if it's recorded correctly. And that's what the test CD does. Next thing it does, the CD, it's just going to give you sound effects, which is just something that you want to listen to see how real things sound. And one thing I know that I was playing it loud, of course, I want to hear, and they have, little things like supermarket sound, police riot, children in a park. But one thing is a freight train crossing. And in that, if you're playing it loud, which I will give you caution if you ever buy the CD, when those air horns went off, they sounded real. I mean, they just blasted. And I've heard that. Now, I've heard that once before, off of a pair of Klipsch corner horns, where a train was passing and it blew off its air horns on the corner horns. And I mean, it sounded like you had a train right in your room. I mean, it was that unbelievable how the corner horns reproduced that. And I will have to say this 845 reproduced that train crossing absolutely realistic. It was something I wasn't prepared. I didn't think it would go that loud, but nothing got damaged. The horns did not get damaged, and compressor drivers didn't get damaged. It had plenty of bass and everything else. So I I like using the Chesky CD to get an overall feel of if things are perfect and if we live in a perfect world, will we be able to hear what we want to hear? And the Chesky CD proved that the Simply 845 does it in spades. In fact, I'm going to be honest with you here, it trumped the Conrad Johnson. It literally shamed the Conrad Johnson. I'm shocked. I hate to even say this, but all the music I played on it, along with the test CD, it just you would not think the Conrad Johnson had any faults. And I know a lot of people have listened to my system with the Conrad Johnson Premier 10 and 11A. You would think it has no faults, but I'll tell you, when I put on the 845, it just had stuck out the faults like a sore thumb. There were other CDs I played, which I was quite shocked over. It was this Henry Mancini's Greatest Hits, Eric Kunzel's Cincinnati Pop Orchestra. Now, I like this music. It's Tellart. Tellart makes good CDs, good sounding CDs. They've always have made before CDs even came out. Tellart records were considered to be like a reference recording or Sheffield. These were your top of the line audiophile records, okay? And they make great audiophile CDs. So Tellart doesn't fool around with the way they put their mics and engineer any of their music. But the thing that really shocked me was that the whole sound stage, when they first played the Pink Panther, which I was not prepared for, went way back. So I was now, instead of sitting with the Conrad Johnson, maybe in the first or second row, horns seem to be more forward. This threw the whole orchestra back. Maybe now you're sitting in, I don't know, maybe the 30th row or 20th row back. It just threw a soundstage so far back. And the only time instruments came forward, if they mic'd them to come forward. But I noticed that the chimes and everything else sounded a lot better. I mean, a lot better than what the Conrad Johnson was able to do, and put them in their place and time. I think timing is a big thing. And this amp gets timing absolutely correctly. Not that the Conrad Johnson didn't, but for some reason, once you hear this and you hear how deep that sound stage is, it's something that horn people probably never heard. That when the orchestra played. Now, there's another part on here, the theme from Hatari. And that's another track on this CD. And I like that sound because it sounds very good. And you just hear things in that piece that through the 845 sounds so, well, what can I say, more exact, more distinguished, even though it's further back into the soundstage. The thing about it is, you may want to have a tendency, like I did, play that particular piece at between 78 and 82 dB. To me, that's a reasonable, because it sounded pretty good. But anyhow, then all of a sudden, the whole orchestra kicks in that, and we're talking going up to 95 to 96 dB. So we're talking something that almost goes 20 dB louder instantly. The 845 handled it with a breeze. No problems at all. Absolutely perfect. And I was really quite shocked. There's another track on there, track 13, The Great Waldo Pepper. And that has drums in it that go real low. I mean, and they're banging. And I'm listening to this. I realize I listened to this in the 80 to 90 dB range. And the 845 handled it like it was nothing. I mean, you always get this, inception that 23 watts, that's not a lot. But for a speaker that's 98 dB efficient. It blew the doors out. I mean, it just literally with that bass. And then, of course, I tried it off with a subwoofer, the SVS. That's the 3000 subwoofer. And now, when I hooked up the subwoofer, I don't want it to interfere with anything that the horns can do. So I put it very low. I stick it on about 45 hertz. And I want it to go from 45 hertz to 23 hertz. I don't want it to go into the mid-range too much because the speaker, the big 15-inch woofer, is going up to 800 hertz. And then it goes off to the horn from 800 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz, kilohertz. So I don't want it to do that. All I want it to do is play those bottom part that I'm missing from 45. I'm not missing 40 because the LTEX will go down to 40 to 35, and definitely it gave a more, what can I say, punch to the bottom end. Okay, though I ran hundreds of CDs through the 845, the Simply 845, this is one I thought I should bring up in the review, which is people singing. And this one, it's called the Fairfield Ford Standing in the Safety Zone. Now, these gentlemen, one of the gentlemen has a voice that could go down to 40 hertz, very deep voice. And the 845 reproduced the 5 gentlemen standing in front of you. Okay, absolutely perfect. I can't say any more, but it sounds like they're in your room. You can tell where each one's standing, where the Conrad Johnson kind of would blur that a little bit. If you get what I mean, it would be blurred. Though it was very good, this separates all 5 of the voices standing in, well, in your room. It's part of the, also with the depth of the sound stage. So with you being able to pick out all 5 of them, like any other of the CDs when they had a human voice, it was very natural. And that's the thing I think I liked about the 845 is it reproduced every CD that I put on it. And I put CD after CD. I ran hundreds of CDs through this amp. And every time it was like listening to it for the first time. I was quite surprised how the CD sounded going through the 845. It was like having a brand new collection because of little things I had not heard from the Conrad Johnsons that I'm hearing through this particular integrated amp. So for those people who would say, well, the separates are the best, I would have to say, no, you probably have to listen to something like the Simply 845, or you have to listen to the Anganku. And then you realize, no, separates, they have their spot, but so does integrated amplifiers today. There are so many things that it did so well. The only thing I can think of that I didn't like is the knob that's on the left-hand side there on top. It should have been put in the front of the integrated amplifier, then on top, because if you have the cage on, how do you get to that knob to switch from CD to phone or whatever? You have to pull the cage off just to switch the knob. That's one negative I could say about this integrated amp. If you have the cage off, no problem. Other than that, I don't have anything bad to say about it. It reproduced music unbelievably natural, the way we want it. Instruments that were portrayed as by themselves, like you'll get a bass, a clarinet, a saxophone, all sounded realistic if you play them at realistic levels. They sounded very realistic. You'd be hard-pressed to think that they weren't. It just reproduced them so well, the 845, Simply 845. I can't even imagine if this is their second best, what their best must sound like, their of, of their line of integrated amps, the absolute 845. I can't imagine that their absolute 845 that costs 5 times more than this integrated amp plays that much better. I imagine by that time you're making trade-offs of how much are you getting for the money you're spending. I'm just guessing. I'd love to hear the absolute 845 and compare it to the simply 45, because to me, I cannot believe how good this is, because it's in the class to me of the Ganku. It sounds that good with the high frequencies and everything. It just sounds magical. There's not any other way I can say it. It's so much different. How much difference is it from the Premier? Oh, it's got to be 30 to 40% better. I mean, that's a lot. Most people, when you go up, maybe you get a 5% better. If you're lucky, even 10. But to really be that much better than the Premier, I was quite shocked. So you get all the mid-range of a 300B, but you don't lack the bass, and you get the high frequencies and bass on top of it. So you get your cake and ice cream and eat it too. The only thing I will conclude with this review, since it's going way too long, is for you horn lovers out there, you Klipsch people out there, you JBL people, avant-garde people, you know who you are, especially you Klipsch people, since Klipsch seems to be the biggest horn seller here in the United States. You're doing yourself an injustice by not at least listening to the Simply 845 off of a set of Klipsch speakers, like the Cornwells, the Hershey's. The Hershey's were a whole different speaker on this amp, completely different from what you play with a push-pull amp, completely different. It's a very good speaker, and if you add on a subwoofer, it just enhances what the speaker cannot do in the low frequencies. With the Klipsch. So the only thing that a Klipsch speaker would probably need is maybe a subwoofer, a small one. The SVS 3000 would be perfect for that, just to get those bottom frequencies. Like with the La Scalas, everyone says, well, they're a little lean on the bass. Just to get that little bit of bass from the 45 hertz on down, it would be no problem. But definitely, this is something that has to be heard to know how it can enhance your horn system. And we're all stuck in the same spot when we use horns. Horns are very forward. We hear that said all the time. They're forward. With this particular integrated amp, the new Simply 845, it definitely will change your whole mind and attitude about horns being so forward sounding. Yes, instruments will come forward if they're close to a mic, like anything else. They'll be reproduced realistically. But I noticed that sometimes I would mention it as a shrill, hurt my ears through horns. Things are being reproduced, and it's like, that's a little edgy to me. The 845 did not display any of that edginess. Okay, it doesn't go out of balance. Where on some recordings, I would hear let's say they played an organ or something like that. The organ would come out so loud compared to the rest of the ensemble, if you understand what I mean, because that's just the way horn speakers are. Not with the 845. It puts everything in its place correctly, and I listen to this thing for hours. Zero fatigue at all. Just listen to it for hours. And it was an amazing integrated amp that I think that Unison Research needs to really start distributing their products a little bit more and getting a little more out there in the United States, because I think once people find out how good it is and how it sounds with, I'm going to say, speakers that are very efficient, I don't think they're going to want to buy a push-pull, because I don't think you need to be scared of only 23 watts of power. Anyhow, this review is going on long enough, but I wanted to make sure I got a thorough review, the best I could do, because there are no reviews of the Simply 845 in the United States on YouTube. There's zero. YouTube has no reviews, so I had to take a little longer to present this, trying to get it the best I could for everybody and what I heard. And I didn't want to use all the adjectives that everybody else uses, that they use the same adjectives for every piece of equipment they ever, review. And before you know it, all you have to do is move the name of the equipment out that they did and just put another equipment in there, and you can use all the same adjectives. And I didn't want to do that with this review. Just give you a bunch of adjectives that, oh, it's got syrupy, mid-range, and the high frequencies, they sparkle. And I try to stay away from too many of those adjectives that everybody uses, because they don't mean anything. It's like you say the same thing with every piece of equipment you test. So what am I supposed to go off of to actually determine whether or not I would like to buy the product? Because you say it about every product. So I'm sorry, I apologize this was so long, but I had to make sure that you understand the difference is tremendous. And I've heard other push-pull amps and stuff that sounded good and decent, but I think in order to beat something like this, and I'm going to be honest with you, price-wise, you are going to have to jump up into astronomical expenditures to really try to beat it. And then, is it really going to beat it or just sound different? And I'm going to say, for you Klipsch people, you're doing yourself an injustice that you buy these speakers. They're great sounding speakers with a great sound and integrated amp like this Simply 845. You will never want to get rid of your speakers or your equipment ever again. You will not want to change because it sounds that good. But like most people say, you become complacent, you start listening to it, and then people convince you that, oh, there's better. And in this case, trust me, after owning these L-Techs since 1975, no, I have not heard better, and I thought I bought the best, the Premier 10 and the Premier 11A. I thought I bought the best. I paid a lot of money for that equipment back when I bought it, brand new. But this, unfortunately, opens up a whole new window that I realized it was not the best. There are still better equipment out there that won't cost an arm and a leg to have your system outperform anything that you imagine. So that's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel. And like I said, sorry it's so long, but there's a lot of things I had to say because it is such a drastic difference between what the Conrad Johnson was putting out, which everybody thought was great. Really, anyone that heard my system would have told you, boy, that's a good sounding system. And I think I've put that in my videos where people made comments that it was the best horn system they heard. Well, do you take something that people think is best and you turn it into even better? And it's incredible. You really need to look at an integrated amp like this if you're running JBLs or Klipsch, because it just will transform those speakers into something wonderful at their price point. So until next time, happy listening, and thank you for watching.